Hello, good afternoon. My name is Melissa Nahn, President and CEO of the American Composers Orchestra, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's professional development session titled Away from the Writing Desk and Into the World, our webinar on creating relationships with orchestras featuring Lisa Bielawa and Garrett McQueen. The music we were all enjoying was an excerpt from a composition by Lisa called Start. It is the conclusion of a set of pieces by Lisa that comprise the half concert length work called The Right Weather, based on an excerpt from Pushkin's Eugene Onegin. I'd like to share that excerpt with you. It says, I roam above the sea. I wait for the right weather. I beckon to the sails of ships under the cope of storms with waves disputing on the free crossway of the sea. When shall I start my free course? When it comes to creating relationships with orchestras towards the goal of artistic collaboration, maybe you find yourself waiting for the right weather or asking yourself the question, when shall I start on my free course? Today's webinar is meant to address those ideas so that you have a better idea of not just the importance of creating these relationships, but on how to approach the work of doing so. This presentation is part of Earshot, which is the nation's first systemic program for building relationships between orchestras and composers through orchestral readings, collaboratory fellowships, consortium commissions, and professional development sessions like this one. Earshot expands the definition of American orchestral music to ensure a vibrant and inclusive future. Earshot is a program of the American Composers Orchestra, completed in partnership with the American Composers Forum, the League of American Orchestras, and New Music USA. Composers for our Earshot readings are selected through an open call with no fee or age limit, and we are delighted to welcome many of them here today. All of our Earshot professional development sessions are open to the public. For the full schedule and list of topics, visit us at www.americancomposers.org. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. You may have many questions or comments that come to mind over the course of this presentation. So if you wouldn't mind offering those using the Q&A function here on Zoom as we go along, we will get to as many of those as we can. If you would like to come on screen and ask your question live, please feel free to use the hand raise function here on Zoom and keep your digital hand raised. We will bring as many of you on screen as time allows. And as a follow-up to this session, there will be material shared to highlight some of the key information presented. That will be available at a later date, so be sure to check back for those. We'll also be offering a survey in the chat at the conclusion of today's session, so if you wouldn't mind clicking on that when it appears and offering your feedback, it will be much appreciated. And with all of that, I would like to pass things over to Garrett McQueen, ACO's Director of Artist Equity. Welcome, Garrett.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you to each and every one of you for attending today. I'm very excited to help moderate today's webinar. I'll take this time to introduce our featured speaker. Composer, producer, and vocalist Lisa Bielawa is a Rome Prize winner in musical composition. She takes inspiration for her work from literary sources and close artistic collaborations. Gramophone reports Bielawa is gaining gale force as a composer, churning out impeccably groomed works that at once evoke the layered precision of Vermeer and the conscious recklessness of Jason Pollock. Her music has been described as ruminative, pointillistic, and harmonically slightly tart by the New York Times, and fluid and arresting, at once dramatic and probing by the San Francisco Chronicle. She is the recipient of the 2017 Music Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters and a 2020 Opera America grant for female composers. She was named a William Randolph Hearst Visiting Artist Fellow at the American Antiquarian Society for 2018 and was artist in residence at Kaufman Music Center in New York for the 2020-2021 season. In 2022, Lisa was selected for a residency with the Louisville Orchestra's Creators Corps and continues her work in Louisville today. Everyone, please help me welcome Lisa. Lisa, thank you so much for joining us today and facilitating this topic. How are you feeling?
I'm great. Thanks, Garrett. Thank you for that.
All
Wonderful to
right.
be here. And thank you, Melissa. This is great.
Well, I'll go ahead and share my screen once again and we'll
Yeah,
jump on in.
fantastic. Well, oh, look, there I am. You can see two of me now. Oh, no, you can see one of me and then you'll see one of me later. I actually have to say it's a pretty great thing to be invited to talk about this particular topic at this moment, because I believe that coming out of the pandemic and coming out of all of the upheaval of the last few years, orchestras, like all arts organizations, but I think orchestras also in particular, because of the sort of the history of the orchestra as an institution, have been in the process of looking at who they are. They're in the process of redefining themselves or checking in with themselves to make sure they understand where they're headed, what their goals are, what their focus is. And so a lot of us artists are doing the same. It's actually kind of a great time to talk about how these relationships between artists and the organizations, the institutions that collaborate with artists, how those relationships might need to be or wish to be, or maybe inevitably are being rewired by everything we've all collectively gone through in the last few years. So that's just a little way to frame this. And that, of course, we could talk about that for 10 hours. But we're going to focus on starting out with a discussion of stakeholders. The stakeholder, I taught a course at Manna School of Music a few years ago called Composing a Creative Life. And essentially, I had students in all, I actually had students who were not only just music composers, but also were creative artists in other fields. And we were taking a look at sort of how we see ourselves as artists within the ecosystem of the arts industry, the arts field at large. And one of the things that I love to do, so I want to do it now, is because we have a nice chat space, and I know we've got a bunch of you out there. And in my favorite environment, we'd all be just chatting with each other over a drink or something. But I have a question for you, which is, who are the stakeholders for you in your work? So, for example, if you're a composer, if you want to make work, right? Let's say you want to make a work. Who else is in the world of that work? How many other people are there? Who are they? I can go first. I will say there's the composer. That's me, right? How about the conductor? There's a stakeholder. Who else? Let's see. Performers. Come on, folks. There's a lot of you out there. Great. Let's see if we can get 12 of these. Great. Here we go. All right. Yeah. All right. We're at what, 8 or 9? Yeah. Good. Great. Scholars, right? Your own peeps. Marketing. Yeah. Other collaborators you might be working with, right? Other artists, right? Great. Keep them coming. I'm going to talk a little bit, but keep them coming. What about people like, I don't know, the people who are selling stuff in the lobby, right? What about the local public school system? How about the commerce office of the city? How about other organizations in other cities who might be in a similar field and might be interested in what you're doing in your location? How about the parents of children who might be involved in the work that you'd like to make? People who are advertising in the program, very good. People who are, who have decided that the audience for your work are the people that they want to sell stuff to. Critics, right? They're there because their job is to let the public know what it is that's going on in the field. And if you're part of what's going on in the field, they might want to be there, right? Good. This is great. At any time, you're welcome to contribute to this list. These are the kinds of lists, good city councils. These are the kinds of lists I like to make with this class. And usually I spend almost an entire class on it. So usually I come away from these little brainstorming sessions with like 60 things. And I think it's time now, Garrett, to share sort of, I actually sent some stuff over to Garrett. A lot of these people here are ones that you've already hit on here. The makeup artists. Oh, that's a wonderful performance when there's actually someone else doing my makeup. I love that. Right? Great. The teachers of the people who are performing. That's an interesting one too. Civic authorities, coaches, right? The distribution network, if it's something that is going to be streamed or distributed. Friends, that's part of your community. Those are stakeholders. So then the question here, instrument technicians, that's a good one too. So the obvious question here is, why are all these people involved in making this work with me? Why are they there? And of course, one of the main things that you could say is money. They want money, right? If it's their job, they're there because it's their job. Although I would dare say that a lot of people in the arts and in our field of sort of art music, right? They could be making a lot more money somewhere else. So money is, sure, it's their job, but also why are they having this job? Why is that? There are donors on this list. Why are donors involved with this particular work? So these are the kinds of questions that I like to sort of start out with when I talk about relationships with orchestras. Because, and you can see some of these, I'm going to kind of touch on all of these bullet points kind of in a circuitous way, interacting with each of these in a variety of, different points. But one of the things that I think always makes me pay very, very close attention when I hear people talking about relationships between orchestras and composers is, who is it that is the beneficiary of that connection, right? So, for example, and one of the things that makes it hard in our field and in our country at large, not just our field, but in our country, is that, of course, orchestras are nonprofit organizations. So just for those of you who may not be aware of how the structure works, how that works is an orchestra is legally, this is a charity. Basically, what that means is orchestras can accept and must have a certain amount of money coming in that is not from ticket sales, that's actually from donations and grants and things like that. We have in our country this system whereby if people make a lot of money, then they can give money to a nonprofit organization and it helps them on their taxes. So then the question is, what do they want to give their money to? So then there are entire departments in orchestras called the development department. These departments are based entirely on trying to make sure that people who wish to give money to a nonprofit organization so that it's a tax deductible donation, that they give it to their organization. That's an entire team on the staff, usually a pretty robust and important team on the staff. One of the things with the premises, of course, of a nonprofit is that if an orchestra is a charity, who are we being charitable towards? That is a very interesting question. And in a way, I think it's sort of a shame, right, that we have this sort of charitable contribution kind of relationship with our artistic institutions, although of course it's also wonderful because that's, it's a way for in our capitalistic society for us to get the, the support, the robust support that we need for the work that we're doing. But it is a sticky wicket, right? Because if we see ourselves as composers as being the sort of the charity of the orchestra, right? If we're the ones who feel that we are going to benefit, and even if we are marketed as the ones who are going to benefit, our orchestra benefits composers, right? Then that begs the question, okay, so if we just want to get in the door so we can benefit from working with an orchestra, there are a lot of things that go unexamined, right? What do we want to do once we get an opportunity to work with an orchestra? Why are we there? Why are we a stakeholder in this particular orchestra's vision, right? Orchestras, like artists, have a vision, have a mission, right? And one of the things that is really important if you're going to be making a relationship with an orchestra or any other institutional body within the arts is to educate yourself, and this is first and foremost, very, very important. Educate yourself on what it is that the mission is of that organization, right? So, and you know, I have to apologize to Garrett because he set things up, you know, to show you in the order that I said I was going to talk about them, and I'm probably going to go in the wrong order. But I will get back to how staffs are structured, but I would actually like to take a moment here to talk about the mission of an orchestra. So orchestras, because they're nonprofit organizations, they actually have to have a mission. That mission is on their tax forms. If you want to see what the mission is of an organization, you can just Google them and say mission statement, and it's got to be there because it's public record what the mission statement, what the mission is of an organization. Otherwise, they're not allowed to be a charitable organization. That's extremely interesting if you want to do this kind of, so I did a little research for us. I'm going to read you some mission statements. I'm not going to tell you what the orchestras are because that's not important. In fact, it's actually quite interesting if I don't tell you which orchestras these are. They're all American orchestras because this is, you know, European orchestras, that's a whole other webinar for the future. But these are all American orchestras. Some of them very well known. Some of them are, you know, in the big, you know, the Big 10 orchestras. Some of them are orchestras that that define themselves not as a regional orchestra. So they're an orchestra within a city that has other orchestras too. So they're defining themselves as being different from other orchestras in a large city. Some of these orchestras are in very small cities. So they are actually helping define the city itself to itself, right? So here are some mission statements. The mission of the orchestra is to enrich, inspire, and transform lives through music, community engagement, and education, locally, nationally, and internationally. Okay, there's one. How about the mission of the orchestra is to change lives throughout our entire community by promoting a culture of music through outstanding performances and education. Okay, we're starting to see, you know, education shows up a lot, right? The word community shows up a lot. Here's one. This orchestra is dedicated to transforming the orchestral experience and eliminating barriers between audience and music. Okay, that's a little bit more slanted towards audience, right? Eliminating barriers, that's new language. How about this? This orchestra exists to disseminate exceptional orchestral music of the present and recent past via performances and recordings of the highest caliber, right? So there's a focus there on dissemination. That's a little bit different. Okay, how about to unleash the power of music to bring people together and lift the human spirit, right? That's very sort of abstract. Some of the ones I think that are sort of interesting have language in them that begs the question, who is being who is benefiting from what? How about the primary mission is to expose people of all ages to the beauty and power of music, right? We have something valuable. Our mission is to expose you to it. That's very interesting language. How about to inspire and serve audiences and communities through the power of musical performance? I've only got a few more of these, but I think they're very, very interesting. To unite, educate, and enrich the community through engaging and transformative power of musical experiences. And then I have a couple here that I think are quite interesting because they have a unique ring about them. They have to do with the relationship between the city and the orchestra. One of them, it says, the orchestra impacts lives through the power of unforgettable musical experiences by sustaining a world-class orchestra for our city. That very clearly states our city is a stakeholder, right, in our mission. And here's another one, to foster excellence and innovation in the performance and presentation of great music, to enrich the lives of our diverse citizenry, to educate current and future audiences, and to bring distinction to our community through the orchestra's presence and standing. That's super interesting. Okay, I learned, because I'm here in Louisville now, I'm working with the Louisville Orchestra for a year, and that's an orchestra with an incredible history. it has, many of you probably know, there was the first the recordings from the Louisville Orchestra in that, I can't remember what they're called now. It's very embarrassing. Somebody will tell me in the chat, I'm sure. There were recordings that came out of the Louisville Orchestra for years and years. There still are more recordings of these early iconic works from the Louisville Orchestra's label in the early years. And it was just after the flood, I think it was in the 30s, there was a large flood in Louisville, and it really just destroyed the city. And one of the things I learned was that there was such destruction that there was even a thought that perhaps they might just pack it up and not be a city anymore. Really, that level of destruction. So one of the first things that they did, that the mayor did and that the community did, is they came together and they decided that they were going to start an orchestra. And that's very touching, right? Yes, basically, here's a community that's just worried about how to get food, and they decide that they wanted to have an orchestra. There's a way that an orchestra gives a city a sense of pride, for example, and that can make the entire city a stakeholder in it. If an orchestra becomes a very sort of high level, internationally renowned orchestra, it can bring pride to the city that has it. And it also has the ability to have impact in the field at large by distinguishing itself from other orchestras, right? What are we going to do that other orchestras are not going to do? So it's worth spending a little time thinking about this, because if you want to work with an orchestra, then it's really good to know what the mission of the orchestra is. And it's even more important to know what your mission is. Right? What is your mission? How does your own artistic vision line up with the mission of the orchestra? That helps you understand and answer the next set of questions, which is, who are you going to be talking to? And how does that line up? Thank you, Garrett. Wow, it's amazing. You went backwards to my other slide. So how are you going to be, who you're going to be speaking to, and who's most likely to be your point of contact if you learn about their mission, then how are you going to know who it is that's going to be responsive to some of the ideas that you might have about how to work together? And, you know, orchestras have a variety of departments. Some of them are, a lot of them are the same in every orchestra. There's always an artistic administration department. Artistic, you know, there's usually somebody who's a director of artistic operations or artistic administration. That person is often your first point of contact. They are often tasked with helping the conductor or music director find work to program, helping sort of find out what's out there, what the new interesting work is, what composers are out there doing things that line up most with the mission of the orchestra. There are, of course, the conductors. And the conductors are often independent contractors. They're often not actually on the staff. That's for various reasons. Again, we could talk about that for a long time, but knowing a conductor is great, but a lot of times conductors do bring repertoire with them, especially when they go and do guest conducting elsewhere, right? So they're sort of free agents, the same way composers are a lot of the time. And then there are also some departments that are worth really understanding and respecting and knowing. One of them is marketing. The marketing department is responsible for getting the word out there, and they're responsible for getting people to buy tickets, right? Their job is to buy tickets. Their question is, they're stakeholders in that they want to know exactly what it is that's going to sell tickets, right? That's their goal. And then there's a development department, as I mentioned before. They're the ones who want the orchestra to be doing things that feel robust enough to the various donors that they are interacting with. And then, of course, there are patron services, people who sort of take care of the actual ticketing and make sure that people's experience at the orchestra concert or with the organization is a positive one. There are entire departments in orchestras that are that are focused on that, the experience of patron services. And then you sometimes have sort of special initiatives of people who may be here in Louisville, for example. There's actually a whole tour section because we're touring around the state of Kentucky. So there's actually a whole touring. Sometimes it's recording. For example, BMOP has a BMOP sound label, so there's a whole recording label involved. One of the other things that we've seen a lot now is that because orchestras have had a reckoning with themselves, they, like many arts organizations, are actually bringing in people to take a look at inclusivity, DEI, or artistic inclusion, equity, which is, Garrett, that's sort of your general area, right? These are areas that are aligned with artistic planning, and they're also aligned with marketing, right? And all these others. So everybody's sort of cross-pollinating in these various teams. So when you enter into an orchestra relationship, the best thing to keep in mind is that the entire orchestra, all of the staff are going to be interested in and invested in the success of their work with you, right? And that also means that you need to be aware of how your work with them is going to help them do what they need to do, right? There's not a single person on the staff of the orchestra who's irrelevant to you as an artist. Every single member of the staff is relevant to you, and you are relevant to them. And making yourself available to them is incredibly important. How you get in the door, you know, it may be through a conductor, it may be through an artistic administration staff member. It may also be through a board member. Board members are often interested in, and just for those of you who may not know how this is structured, the board is not usually, it's not staff members, although sometimes high-level executive members of the staff can serve on the board. But generally, the board of directors is also something that's required if an organization is going to be nonprofit in this country. You have to have a board of directors. And in fact, the board of directors is people who are usually giving, right? They don't make money, they give money, right? And they also give time. And they are very invested in the mission of the organization. In fact, the mission statement is discussed at board meetings, and it's actually the board that rubber stamps the mission statement, not the staff. The staff can do planning, they can do 5-year planning, they can present various kinds of ideas for the future to the board, but the board, they're the ones who are actually the bosses. They are the ones who say, this is, okay, we're happy with the direction you're going. And that's really, really important to understand. So the board is invested in the direction of the organization as well. And so that might mean that that people on the board will bring composers and creative people into the family of the orchestra. So there are a lot of ways that you can, and I see now the questions about talking more about getting in the door. There are a lot of ways that you might be able to make a point of contact with an organization. Pretty much anybody in the staff, if it's a healthy organization, in the staff and the board of the organization, is a way to start building a relationship with the organization. But the thing that's important to know before you reach out is what is the mission of the organization, and also understand what everybody does, so that by the time you talk to anybody in any department, you're actually aware of how their work fits in to making things happen. Now, there's a fair amount of, I interact with a lot of young composers, and I was young too once. And one of the things that I find myself saying a lot to young composers, because there's a real hunger and a desire, to get in the door, is that it's I believe that it's much more important to have a long career than an early one. I'd rather have a long career than an early one, right? So there have been some, believe it or not, opportunities that I have passed up, chances to meet, let's say, a major soloist or a conductor, because I didn't actually think that the way in which I might be introduced was really the right time. I think it's important to note that as composers, even though maybe sometimes it seems like the metaphor I've been using here in my relationship with the Louisville Orchestra staff is that we're not hamsters, right? We're not in a cage that are then we're not sort of being fed pellets, right? Composers are actually artists. We're not the sole beneficiaries, right? We're not the ones who are trying to get stuff, and we're just hoping an orchestra gives us stuff. We actually need to know what we're going to do when we get in the door, and that's part of how you get in the door, is that you need to understand what it is that you wish to do. Do you want to engage with the particular audience, the community that in the city where the orchestra is? That's actually why I'm here in Louisville right now. One of the things that happened to me in the interview, and I think this is pretty funny, when I got an interview for this particular position, they said to me, well, you're an established composer. Why do you want this job? And I said, well, who wouldn't want this job? You know, you guys have an amazing mission, right? But it really did have to do with not just the fact that it was a chance to get performances by a major orchestra. That actually wasn't it. Of course, I'm older now, so you know, when you actually spend some time in the field, you realize that it's not just getting stuff; it's actually what it is. What's the stuff that you want to do, right? And when you find collaborators whose vision is lined up with your own work in a way that can move the work forward, then you can find that the musicians really embrace the work too, that the conductor really loves the work too, and also that you have a fulfilling experience with the audience, for example, or with the that when you meet the donors, you find that the donors already know about you and are eager to meet you, that they want to know about your work because, let's say, maybe they were instrumental in bringing you there in the first place. So I think that one of the things that I really do care a lot about kind of emphasizing in this particular talk is that, contrary to what it may seem like, it is actually a wonderful time for composers to sort of present themselves in conversations with potential colleagues, board members, staff members, conductors, to present themselves as citizens of this ecosystem that we're in, of this field, and to bring a vision not just of our own work, but also of what the audience is, what the organization is interested in, you know, in fulfilling for their own communities, and also what's the way forward. You know, one of the things that I used to do when I first moved to New York, I had to decide whether or not to take a gig, which was good. It meant that I was being offered gigs, right? But we had a 2 out of 3 rule, right? The gig had to have 2 out of 3 things. It had to pay well, and or it had to be artistically fulfilling, and or it had to have the potential to lead in directions that were going to be good for my artistic and professional future. And a gig had to have 2 of those 3 things, or I wouldn't take it. And that means if it was a lot of money, but it didn't have either of the other things, I wouldn't take it. If it was really artistically fulfilling, I couldn't really afford to take it. If it was just going to be a dead end, it wasn't going to lead to anything, and it was going to exhaust me because it was also not going to give me enough money, then I wouldn't take it. So these are the kinds of things that that I sort of thought we could kind of go through today and talk about. And I know we're going to have a little bit of time for questions, but I see a bunch of them coming up already. And I'm wondering, Garrett, if you think that I should try to fold in some of those now.
Yeah, I think that would be great, especially considering the number of people who are curious about
Yeah,
getting in the door.
yeah, great. So how do we do that? I see a lot of, I haven't been actually reading them all coming in here yet.
And one question that I'll pose to sort of, I guess,
Yeah,
frame that question when we talk about engaging all stakeholders toward building those
right.
relationships, are there people or departments that should be prioritized by artists, or is it really a equal framework that we should be viewing this from?
Yeah, well, I just came up with an answer to your question and another question I just saw, I think, as part of a whole one. How you get in the door has to do with what you want to do. And what you want to do has to do with who you talk to, right? Which door you knock on is what determines you know, what you want to, what you'd like to explore in your work determines where you knock on the door. I mean, obviously it's always great to meet a conductor if one of the things you want to do is to have fulfilling experiences working with wonderful conductors. I've written a bunch of pieces that have no conductor, so I'm often really actually excited to try to find a way to make a relationship with an orchestra whose board and musicians are so adventurous that they're willing to embrace the vision of making work with me that has no conductor, for example. That's really interesting to me. I think with the touring component, for example, or or with the recording component, if you know that an orchestra has a certain initiative like that, it's great to know that that might be something that you can sort of that you have a special interest in. And if it's an orchestra like these ones, these last two that I read, these last two mission statements, where the goal is really to be bringing a kind of sense of pride to the region, right? Then if your work also has within it a sense of pride in that region, then that is a great place to start. Then you might find out who it is at the orchestra that is in charge of brainstorming about the touring, for example. And so I think it sort of depends on where it is you want to go with the work. I'll just sort of reemphasize that having a clear idea in your mind before you even try to figure out how to meet somebody at the orchestra. Have a clear idea of what it is that you'd like to do, what you'd like your work with that orchestra to look like, how would you like it to feel, what would you like it to be, and then know the orchestras and make sure that you're approaching an orchestra that really has your kind of vision kind of encoded in its own mission as an organization, because orchestras are really just like artists in a way. They are trying to make a difference and have a voice in their communities. So are we as artists. And so lining up those things together is really where it's at, and identifying who it is on the staff. If it's an organization that's in a city where you are able to go to a concert, go to the concert, go to the pre-concert talk, go to receptions, find the people with the name badges, talk to them, find out what's happening at the organization, introduce yourself. And if it's an organization in a different part of the country, you may want to email a variety of different people, but know who they are in advance and know what they're interested in, and do your research in advance so that when you approach them to talk about the work, you can do so in a way that is collaborative. I see a collaborator on the screen now. Hello, Mark. How are you?
Hi there. I'm fine. Thank you, Lisa. This is wonderful. Thank you, Garrett, for letting me join this conversation for a moment. So may I
Yes,
just
please.
go ahead and throw a question out there? So I am thankful to say I've had a couple of performances here and there, but none with my hometown orchestra. I'm in Birmingham, Alabama, and our orchestra is a gem. It's a wonderful organization and adventurous in its programming. And I know some of the players, and so I had sort of indirect access to the conductor and music director, Carlos Iscaray. And so one of the members of the orchestra said, well, why don't I just put in a good word for you and pass along some of your music to the conductor? My question is this, and I hope this will be helpful to many people. If I have multiple points of access, since it's my hometown, I could reach out to any number of people. How do I pace that so that I'm not sort of overstepping? I don't want to be out of line. Now that I have some music on the conductor's desk, at what point do I reach out to the conductor again? At what point do I reach out to someone else in the organization? How do I sort of pace and orchestrate, for lack of a less punny word? How do I orchestrate my contacts with the orchestra? Thank you again for letting me ask this question.
No problem. That's a great question. I have my mind's going a couple different directions. It's funny. It reminds me of fundraising, oddly enough. I mean, the question is pertinent to fundraising. You ask somebody for a donation for something, for example. How often do you say to them, hey, did you get my request for a donation? Right. But I have a rule for that I think also can help here, which is I actually never follow up just to follow up. I always reach out with news. It's always with news. You know, I was just touring around Eastern Kentucky, and I met a bunch of traditional musicians there. It reminded me of that talk we had at the reception. What an inspiring region that is in the state. You know, Mark, you're in Birmingham. Just because you are a composer with some ambition in Birmingham, that's not all. You're somebody who's regional, who's actually from the area. And so if you have news about your Birminghaminess, right? If you've got news to share about how you are, you know, every time you encounter or talk to anybody from the organization, it can be not a direct hit reminder, but an actual, just a sort of touching base with some new information. Always bring new information. So that's that. But also the other half of my answer is, what is the work, right? You could be from Birmingham and your work could not necessarily be of interest to the local orchestra, right? It takes more than that, because if it's just that you're local, then that can seem to be the case, that their mission then is to program music that benefits local artists. But you're not just the beneficiary, right? You are not just the beneficiary. You are part of this ecosystem. And what that means is you're local. What does that bring them? What does that bring them that you are from there, right? One of my fellow Creators Corps composers, there are 3 of us here in the Louisville Orchestra right now, is Tyler Taylor, wonderfully talented composer. He's a local. He was born and bred in Louisville. And it's something that the orchestra is very, very proud of, that he's from here and that he was selected through this competitive process. But it's also something that he owns, right? It's something that he will say it's very important. He thinks it's important for this program to start out this first year with somebody who's local, because it ties the program to the city. It makes it clear that in order for Louisville to have a world-class program like this, it doesn't need to just import people, you know, that there's really robust and wonderful stuff happening right here already. And those are very important points. And those are points that he can make alongside the orchestra that can make them also. So something to keep in mind. Yeah.
There's one question that was posed. Max is asking about your opinion on artistic administrators and programming staff as it relates to the conversation of stakeholders. How should they be approached or engaged?
Yeah. Artistic administrators, it's their entire job to find new interesting stuff. So in some ways they're easy, but in other ways they're hard, because they know everything, all whatever. And so how are you gonna sort of be the one that makes that connection that lasts, right? But one of the things that I've discovered about that sort of artistic administration part of the staff of orchestras is that they are the ones. It's an incredibly important job if you think about it, because they're the ones who have to be looking out into the world and making sure that the connection between the artistic programming and the world, you know, that they're not actually dealing with patrons or donors. They're focusing on the world at large and trying to sort of situate the organization in the world at large. So obviously we artists and composers are in the world at large, right? So I find that it's often good because the artistic administration people usually know everybody. So it's often a fun thing I find it fun whenever I meet somebody from that department to kind of find out who they've worked with. Like, who do we have in common? Like, oh, that person that, you know, oh, that piece was great. Yeah, I was at the premiere for that. It was amazing. Did you, you know, and ask them questions, ask them a lot of questions about what kind of work they have been finding, what they think is really interesting. I like to ask them things like, so what do you see happening these days? What are some of the things that are happening among young composers these days? I mean, I'm always very curious about that. Believe it or not, just a conversation like that is often the best way to sort of just figure out whether you fit in the picture, and also to show through your own through your own knowledge of or curiosity about the direction they're taking, that's already collaborating. And I think, you know, the very first conversation with an artistic administrative person is a collaboration right away. And so I think it's a special case, right?
There's one point that you made that I would love for you to expound on a little bit more. In our preparation meeting,
Yeah.
you made it clear, you know, this idea of a composer not being the sole beneficiary of a collaboration. You know,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think about that a lot in my Buddhist practice. You know, the pursuit of
Yeah.
happiness for
We
others,
did have
but
a talk
also
about
for
that.
self,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I wonder if you can speak to that and maybe speak specifically to how composers should view themselves or approach the conversation with that framework in mind, a collaboration
Yeah.
not being solely benefiting me, the artist, but
Right.
the artist
Yeah.
and all stakeholders involved.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because of course a lot of us, I mean, I haven't done anything in my life to secure any stability or whatever. So a lot of times when people say to me like, well, don't you want to give back? I'm like, well, I'd love to give back, except that I, you know, like I don't have anything. You know, I mean, a lot of times it sort of seems like artists are, you know, it's difficult to be an artist in this country, in this time. It's difficult. So I just want to say, like, it's no wonder, right, that artists often feel like they need to be, you know, they work so hard and they often don't get, you know, remuneration of at a level that their intelligence might, or their, you know, that their resourcefulness might bring them, right? But I think that that one of the ways that I like to look at it is, and this is it takes a little bit of thought. If there's a system in which there is one main beneficiary, there's usually paternalism at work. That's what I've discovered. That's what I've discovered. Maybe it's because I came into the field as a woman when there were not a lot of us. And I see some people here, you know, I'm a composer who's past 50, you know, as well. I think there is a sort of a gravitas, you know, there's a kind of a, you know, that you can have when you have a little bit of experience with these sort of the ways these things work, right? But one of the things that I learned fairly early on, and it also has to do with the beginning of the Mata Festival. When we started the Mata Festival, I founded that festival. It's now just had its 25th anniversary, which is so terrifying to me. But anyway, when I founded that with Eleanor Sandreski and Philip Glass, my main reason, right, the reason I was a stakeholder in the Mata Festival was that as a young composer, I found that the only times, this is back then, it's no longer the case, the only times that I came into contact with other composers of my generation, it was either because we were all chosen to study with some master composer in Europe or something, in which case it was sort of a protracted adolescence, right? Young composers, like, you know, sitting at the feet of a master, or we were being brought together in order to compete for one commission or one winner, right? So every time I came into contact with my own colleagues, it was either in a kind of a, you know, like little sitting at the feet of somebody kind of way, or it was in a kind of a competitive way. And we started the Mata Festival. I started the Mata Festival. I mean, we started it together, but the reason I was personally that I was a stakeholder in that is that I wanted there to be a place where we could come together just through fascination with each other's music and a desire to just kind of be, you know, like to have some gravitas, to like say, you know, we're young people starting out. We may not have a lot of visibility yet. We may not have a big audience. We may not have orchestras, you know, making premiering our music. We know, but we are making work, and we are here, and we're making work, and we are building a new generation of work. So I think there's a certain way in which it's dangerous to see yourself going into a meeting as someone who just wants to get in the door or just wants to be included, right? It's important. We have now all of this sort of discussion of inclusion, which is why it's tricky. It's tricky. It's important. It's important if the doors are going to be open, they need to be open to more people. So important. However, there's an additional thing we need to do, I think, right now in this moment in time, which is we need to make sure that we don't see composers as, you know, a sort of a maybe, hopefully more diverse representation of like hamsters who are not actually doing something that is about engaging and having gravitas and getting in there and making work as a collaborator with the organizations whose vision matches our own vision. So.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
There's one question here from Greta. Greta asks, how would you approach an orchestra about a work that's been read at a music festival or maybe a program like Earshot, but not performed by a professional orchestra?
You know, I'm going to go back and say the same thing. What's the piece? What's the piece? What is the piece? Why does it, you know, what is the vision that it, what's the connection between that piece and the organization? How are they going to, how is the meeting ground between that piece and this orchestra going to create something larger as a collaborative unit? I think it really depends on the work itself. If the work is, you know, know the orchestra, find out which orchestras have performed works that are similar in scope or scale, or if there's subject matter, which I know is another whole subject, you know, that we could talk about for, you know, if there's subject matter, you know, or is there a certain way of making the work that you know that is going to help an organization with its, you know, with its particular goals for audience building, for example? Or is there something about it, like what about that piece is going to, you know? And then also in the realm of news, like I was saying before in answer to Mark's question, in the realm of news, you know, you can have news. Hey, this piece was read. It's just read and it hasn't yet received its premiere. And I was thinking that, you know, because your orchestra is involved in blah, 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 and this work is concerned with ha or nuhu, you know, find the ways, show them how the Legos fit together. Show them how the Legos fit together. This is the work. This is your work that you're doing. This is my work that I'm doing. This could be really great if we do this together.
And when we talk about really getting to know an orchestra, getting to know a collaborator, you've made it clear how important it is to become familiar with the mission statement of those organizations. Yeah. I wonder if there are aspects of a mission statement that you look for when prospecting new collaborators, green flags, maybe even red flags from a mission statement.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I sort of highlighted a bunch of words here, and I of course am always looking for the words audience and community. Community is tricky because community means two different things that can actually seem opposite now, both of which are important, right? There are, you know, does my work represent, you know, let's say the queer community, or, you know, or the Black community, or, you know, or is it about building community, which means that actually it's more about community meaning all, you know, so is it representing a community, or, you know, these kinds of things. So I'm looking at that to try to see if that's, you know, if that resonates. I'm also always looking at, you know, audience. I'm looking for some buzzwords I don't really love. I mean, we don't really see the word outreach very much anymore, which is great because outreach implies that you're on the inside reaching out. Like, why are you on the inside? Who said? Like, who are you? You know, I think these kinds of, again, these sort of paternalistic language that had kind of been in there in the inner workings of the nonprofit architectures of institutions, we're finally starting to see that come out, but it's still in there. And I look in a mission statement to see if there are vestiges of that. And if there are, it may not be the right fit for me because, you know, and I think it's, I also know, for example, that there are some orchestras that are focused particularly on a certain kind of direction that I can celebrate as an audience member, and I can recommend other colleagues. And that's another thing, by the way, I would do. I know we're running out of time. I did a gig once, I sang for Joe Jackson. I don't know if any of you know him. He was this big pop star years ago. I did a recording session for Joe Jackson. And I tried to do what it was he wanted me to do. And I could not, he kept saying, well, can you sing it more this way? Can you sing it more that way? All this stuff. And finally I realized, he's describing my friend Alexandra's voice. I'm not the right singer. I finally said to him, you know what? I'd love to be on your album, but I'm not the right person. I actually think, if you could just pay me like $100 for my time, I think I've got the right person. You should get her in there. And she actually did the recording. But it was actually really good. I mean, you got to know if you're the right person. Not everything is about me. And that stuff like gets, this whole pay it forward even is still too proprietary. I think it's really, if you're about building community, then that actually means you need to take an active interest in the well-being and the liveliness and the, and the robustness of our field. And if you do that and you show that in every interaction you have, then you're going to be a totally valued and well-loved member of the field. That's all there is to it.
Well, there are two more questions that I'd love to have you address before we
Sure.
discuss today. The first one comes from Rain. Rain asks, have you found that instrument forces generally have a major effect on consideration of a piece? So the relationship between what's good collaboration and what you bring to the table, specifically when we're talking about instrumentation.
Yeah, I mean, there are some projects that I know I need big forces for, and so I can be supportive of an organization that is lighter on its feet and nimble, but I can't, I'm not gonna bring that project to that organization. Yeah, it's gotta be the right size thing. It's gotta be the right size thing. And I've also had it, I've had experiences where I think it's going to be the right thing, and then I end up getting in a meeting, they end up getting excited, but they want to do it smaller and smaller and smaller. And I think like, let's touch base in a year or two when maybe I have something that's more the right size. That's happened to me recently where I thought that there was an invitation to sort of explore a big idea. And my ideas tend to be kind of big. So it's something that happens. Like, there's no reason to get discouraged. It's not an organization is what it is. It has the capacity it has. It does what it does. Just because we write enormous pieces doesn't mean that we deserve to have every orchestra do them at the time. Though that attitude is not is not an ecosystem attitude, I think. But save it for somebody who's really the right collaborator.
Great, thank you. And with all of the talk about mission statements, we actually have a request for a little live feedback on an artist mission statement. So the mission reads, to write fugal orchestral works because Bach didn't have the opportunity to write fugues for the types of orchestras we have today. I wonder if you have feedback on that sort of artist mission statement.
Huh. Well, it's a corrective one, actually. That's my feedback is, it's corrective. It's like, because Bach didn't have this. So what you're implying is your mission statement is going to be embraced by people who also feel that it's a shame that Bach didn't, in other words, there's a lot there that you need to find in common, right, with your interlocutor, right? I think it sounds kind of interesting, but I think it is a very focused. It is very focused because it has to. It's a corrective languaging. So I would say maybe if there's a way to kind of tweak it so that it doesn't have as much of that. Although maybe that's your style. Everyone should be themselves. I mean, really, I say that, and then you're gonna find some conductor who's like, yeah, that's what I want to do. My whole life, that's what I want to do. But the more particular you are, right, the fewer people. And it's actually, I see here that smaller orchestra pieces limits performance opportunities. Everything limits, the more specific you are, the more that limits opportunities. But the more vague you are, the less impactful you're going to be. I mean, go for it. Be specific. It's like dating. It's like speed dating. You got 6 minutes with somebody. You have to find out, like, I like jumping out of planes. A lot of people are going to be like, I'm sorry, that's not my thing, right? Go there and tell people what you're really passionate about. Don't, if you're really passionate about smaller orchestra pieces, do smaller orchestra pieces. It's not about performances. It's about what you want to hear, what you want to do. And the more passionate you are about that, the more you're going to find people who are also passionate about that. It's like my conductor list things. my manager constantly says to me, "Oh, Lisa, you're doing another piece. It's not going to be able to be done by orchestras because it's got some special kooky thing where people are all over the hall, or there's, it's conductorless, or it requires this." And I can't help myself. I can't help it. It's just what I love. It has limited my performances. It absolutely has. And yet I'm in my happiest place when I'm writing work like that. I can't do anything about it. So.
Well, if anyone has questions that come up later or any special requests, I see in the chat someone asking for a recommendation for a piece to be performed by the Louisville Orchestra. How can people reach out directly to you?
Though they can find me on the staff. I mean, they can write to me. I think you can probably find me on the staff of the orchestra, and I'm happy to pass things along. I mean, to the degree that I can do things like that, I'm always happy to hear music. I don't have a lot of time. It takes me a long time to listen to things because I'm super busy. But I think do your thing, be passionate about what you're passionate about, let it show, and let your flag fly. And see who else is flying a flag that looks like your colors, and remember that it's always better to have a long career than an early one. Always better to have a long career than an early one. And the way to have a long career is to really build inside yourself on what it is that you care about, that you are passionate about.
Great, great. Well, I think that's a perfect place for us to end. Lisa, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you all.
This has been phenomenal. Just as a reminder to everyone, I did put a link to a survey in the chat. So if you wouldn't mind, please going and offering your feedback, and I will invite Melissa back to the stage to close us out. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Garrett. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you to each and every one of you for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you. Once again, please do give us your feedback on that survey that is in the chat right now. It helps us to form our future workshops and select topics and all of those wonderful things. So thank you so much for doing that in advance. We'd also like to welcome you back in a couple of weeks on Wednesday, April 5th at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time for our next session titled Fine Print, a webinar on media rights and unions featuring Alicia Lawyer and Corey Field in conversation with me. Another huge thanks to our earshot partners, American Composers Forum, New Music USA, and the League of American Orchestras. We are very grateful to the many individuals and organizations who have made earshot possible through their support, and to ACO's artists, staff, and board for making this program a reality. For more information on earshot, including how you can apply as a composer or connect with us to bring the program to your orchestra, as well as a full list of our supporters, visit us online at www.americancomposers.org. Thank you so much again, and enjoy the rest of your day.